Today, we're gonna wrap a custom fishing rod. I've been using custom wrap rods since 2008, and I've been wrapping my own rods since 2011. One of the benefits of a custom wrap fishing rod is that you get to lay out the rod for your fishing style, and you can design it so that it's comfortable to fish all day in the hand. I'm gonna go over the materials used to build this rod, and I'm gonna build it with you step by step. And in the description below, I'm gonna leave a link to all the components that I use to build this rod. And I'm also gonna link a few tutorials on how to wrap a rod. I wanna help you guys get your fishing tackle dialed in, and hopefully this video helps with creating your first custom rod. At the end of the video, I'm gonna give a price breakdown on this custom wrap fishing rod versus a stock rod that you can find at your local tackle shop. And I'll also give you a few thoughts on the comparisons between a stock rod and a custom rod as far as pricing goes. Now, all you rod builders out there, if you have any comments on anything I do in this video, leave them in below so I can read them, I can learn from them, and other people can do the same. I'm excited to get into this rod build, so let's get to it. Materials. I found a Phoenix C796 at a local tackle shop, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to make a rod for the channel and a rod for myself. So this is a 7-foot 9-inch heavy powered fast action rod. The lure weight is from 3/8 ounce to 2.5 ounce. I purchased a Fuji skeleton reel seat. So with this reel seat, a large part of the blank will be shown in the back of the reel seat. This will give the rod more sensitivity as your hand will be on the blank while you're fishing it. You'll be able to feel bites more easily. And this is what the reel seat looks like mocked up on the rod. I will be trimming down that screw piece to make the presentation a little bit tighter. And here are the two EVA handle foam pieces I picked up. These are in their raw form, so they will need to be cut down and sanded to fit my specifications. And I have a variety of guides always on hand, either for repairing rods or for making a rod. We'll choose 8 guides from this box for the rod build. And we're going to use rod building resin and epoxy to apply the guides. Shaping the foam. First thing I need to do is cut down the handle sections and sand them to the specifications that I need. This is the rear end of the grip, and there's quite a lot of foam there that I need to take off. So I use this long screw, push it down into the handle, tighten it up on the drill press. I'm going to use the drill press when sanding down the rod handles. You can also use a standard hand drill, but the drill press has a higher speed, better accuracy while sanding. I'm going to mark off 2 3/4 inches for the bottom piece of the handle. Use a razor blade to go ahead and cut that line. So now that I have that 2 3/4 inch piece on the bolt in the drill press, I'm going to go ahead and sand it down with the block and 80 grit. With the 80 grit, I'm going to be able to knock down that foam quickly. Check the measurements. I got the foam piece pretty mated well to the rear handle, and now I need to throw an angle on it to make the rear handle more comfortable. I decided to use a softer piece of foam. This is a 3M product, 150 grit. I didn't want to take off too much material too fast because I knew we were coming down to the end here. We're getting close to where we wanted to be. And once I got the shape I wanted, I ran some 220 over it, even went a little further, did some 400 to give it a really soft feel. And then I started working on the edges. I beveled the edge on the rear of the handle so it'd be soft in the palm. And right here, I'm showing you that the foam handle can go inside of the rear grip. I definitely would suggest doing that so that the handle connection has a stronger bond, as opposed to mounting them flush with each other. I prefer 1/4 inch or so to go inside of the handle. I'm going to do that with a straight edge, and I'm going to use a file for that. That file will give you a really straight line. All right, fits up perfect. You can see this is what the rear handle is going to look like. Happy with it, so let's move on to the other pieces. Now here is that piece that I cut off earlier. And I'm going to use this for the front of the handle and for the trim pieces for that skeleton reel seat. And once I get it to the width I want, I'm going to do something different here. I'm going to cut that foam with some braided line. With that drill press rotating at such a fast degree and hitting it with that braid, it's a quick slice. And I was able to get some nice straight pieces. I got 3 out of this, and we'll work on that a little later. I'm going to use this other material for the butt of the rod. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off a piece and start sanding that down. Now you're building a custom rod, so you can design these pieces to fit your fishing style and needs. So for this butt section, I'm running a 1.5 inch piece of EVA foam. I get it sanded down to the shape I want. I hit it with all that smoother sandpaper, and then I throw a nice bevel on the bottom. You can see the foam pieces I have for the custom handle, and on the bottom there you can see those 3 trim pieces. I did build those. I guess I built them off camera, but those will also go on the rod.
Cutting rod.
Now that the handle pieces are built out, let's take a look at the rod. So I measured out this rod, and it's actually a 7, 8.5. And I also think that possibly someone returned this rod. Maybe they worked on it, returned it, or sold it back to the tackle shop, because it's supposed to be a 7.9 and it was 7, 8.5. So 7 foot, 8 inches and a half. Hey, that's okay. I got a good deal on it. They wanted to get rid of it and I wanted to buy it. My goal for this rod is it to be a 7.4. So I want to go ahead and chop off 4.5 inches off the butt section. And my goal for the rod is a spotted bay bass swim jig rod. I really like the action of the front end, so I thought it would be okay to chop off a couple inches in the back. This will change the action of the rod. Once you start removing pieces, either from the front or the back, it will give the rod a different action, but I think it will suit my needs. And you can see here I have marked out, this is the spine of the rod. You always want to find that spine to make sure your guides lay down on that line. I'm going to make a tape line 4.5 inches from the butt. So we got our line taped up. We're going to go ahead and hit it with the Dremel and just get that thing chopped off.
Building handle.
I have all the foam pieces slid down the blank, and I have the handle mocked up for where I want the reel seat. So I have some purple tape up front so that none of the foam pieces slide up the rod. I did chop down that screw section. I basically took it in half, and this is so that when the reel seat is tightened down on the reel, there's not much thread going to be shown. I want the reel seat area to be very tight and comfortable in hand while fishing all day. And for a reel handle on my casting gear for bass fishing and spotted bay bass fishing, I like around 11 inches. That's just enough to get it under the armpit. You can see those foam pieces off camera. I did sand them down a bit. I threw a little bevel on them. Since my skeleton reel seat didn't come with any trim pieces, I built out these EVA foam pieces to fit nicely as trim pieces. So as you can see, I have a layer of tape, and that's because my reel seat circumference is too big for the rod. I have some tape added to build up for the reel seat to sit. It's a standard rod building technique, but what I want to do with that tape is cut out channels so that epoxy has a place to sit a little deeper and bond to that reel seat and tape. You can see here's the rear of the reel seat. There's already 2 pretty fat grooves in there, so I'm not going to cut out any channels. As I'm applying this on, I did not realize that it was white, and that's pretty troubling when you're building out a rod, because epoxy is going to get places and white is going to make for a harder cleanup. I would suggest not using this 2-part epoxy for building out a rod. You want to use clear. But we're going to take our time and be careful with it and clean up any mess along the way. Professional rod builders do use something called U40 rod bond. It is also a 2-part epoxy. It's a really slow dry. I prefer my stuff to kick off pretty quick when it comes to the handle section. And that's because I don't want the foam pieces separating. I want them to cure really fast. Now we'll start working on that front screw. Same thing, add the epoxy. And as you can see, it squirts out everywhere, so that's why you want to use clear. We're pushing together those EVA pieces, make that trim piece real nice. Again, you want to make sure that reel handle is lined up with itself and the spine of the rod. And this is how it turned out. I gotta say, I like the way the layout is. I did clean it up more after this with a Q-tip and toothpick and some alcohol. I found a butt cap for the rear of the handle, but as you can see, it's just kind of long. So I'm thinking about using just the rear of that butt cap. So I want to go ahead and cut that down. So I put a tape line on it, and now I'm just going to hit it with the Dremel. And to get everything flattened out, get all the burrs off it, I just run it over some 80 grit sandpaper. And this is what I'm thinking for the butt cap of this rod. And here's the completed handle section. I feel that this is the most important section of the rod because it's what's going to be in your hand all day. This is what's going to determine if you really like the rod or not. It's how the reel sits and how the handle sits. So overall, I'm happy about this. There's still a lot of work to go.
Guides.
Now for the guides, I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna copy a layout of a rod that I have already. And this is a 7.5 heavy. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy over the guide placement. So just line up where you think the tip would be, and with a China marker, I'm just gonna mark where I think the guides would go. I'm gonna grab out some guides from the box. I have a mixture of Fuji guides. I'm going number 10 from the first double foot to 8s to 6s, and then the tip.
Wrapping.
First off, forgive the out of focus camera work. I was unaware that the camera was out of focus. I'm gonna put a link in the description on where you can find a tutorial on how to wrap guides. I already know that I'm not the best at explaining how to wrap a guide. I'm gonna point you to the website where I learned how to wrap guides. You tape down your thread, you wrap it over the guide, and then you start building the thread up over the guide that you want. At some point you cross over the thread, you make a few wraps, you cut off the excess that you started with, run some more wraps over the guide, and when you get close to the end point, that's when you put in this loop thread, and that's how you're gonna finish and lock off the guide wrap. You put the thread that you're working through the loop, and then you pull the loop underneath the thread wraps. Use this burnishing tool to make sure all the threads are straight, and then you can trim off the excess. So I go ahead and do that for all the guides. So we get through all the double footers, finish up the single footers, and then we're gonna do the tip. Now I apologize for not being able to explain this better and have it in focus as well. I also do some trim around all that EVA foam in the handle section. Tighten up all that handle, make it nice. Found a WARBAITS sticker that fits right between that handle. So I got it stuck there, but now I'm just gonna run some thread to compress it down to the handle, make sure it doesn't pop off. We're gonna run some wraps in the front of this handle. Here's what that inside of the handle looks like. And here's what the thread wraps look like on the handle section. And I took a close-up of my wraps on the guides so you can see what they look like. So some pretty tight work here. And before I put on the epoxy, I will push all the threads together again.
Epoxy stage 1.
So we mixed up some epoxy and we're gonna get them on the thread wraps. Now I epoxy the guides in 2 stages. The first stage is I get all the threads wet with a thin coat of epoxy. I don't build up the epoxy here. I'm just getting all the threads locked in. If you guys do this a little different, let me know in the comment section, because this does take a little longer when you do it in 2 stages. But as you can see, I'm just making sure all the threads are wet from edge to edge. I do that big open area where that sticker is, get all that epoxy on there. The first stage is complete. It's on the dryer. All the threads are wet and you can see they soak in quite a bit. You can see some of the threads through that epoxy, and that's what I'm looking for. It's basically a thin coat to lock all those threads up. And this is what the epoxy looks like after 24 hours. The epoxy is hard to the touch. It's locked up those threads pretty nicely. And now it's time for that second stage and build up a nice layer of epoxy over the first layer.
Epoxy stage 2.
My eye and hand coordination are not very good at small areas anymore. So what I do is I run a tape line to ensure that I get a really nice line of epoxy on the rod. This does take a little longer to do, and some of you rod builders out there can roast me in the comment section for this, but this is what I do to give myself a nice line of epoxy on the rod. So here I go. This is where I get in there a little heavier. I get that epoxy on the blank on the front end, and then on the inside I do it by hand and eye. But on the outer stuff, that's where I like a really flush straight line. I'm building up that epoxy over that first layer, give it some more strength, give it a really nice finish. And I'm always turning the rod by hand so that there's some rotation on that epoxy. You never want to let it just sit or it'll come right off the rod. Always have that rod turning. After I get the guides finished, I work on the handle area. Get a nice layer of epoxy there. And once that's all finished, I take it to the dryer. And on the dryer, that's where I pull off the tape. And you will want to run some heat over your epoxy. That'll get out the bubbles. Do that on the stage 1 and stage 2. And this is what it looks like with my tape line. I think it makes a really nice, crisp line. There's no waviness to it. You can see how the epoxy has built up over that stage 1, and that's what I'm looking for. Get this thing rotating and curing for 24 hours. We're gonna add that butt cap now. The interior circumference was a little big, so added some tape to it, made it have a tight fit, mixed up some of that 2-part epoxy, got it inside of the butt cap, and now I smash it onto the rod. I add a little tape to that to ensure that the butt cap doesn't come off the rod.
Results.
I absolutely love the way this rod turned out. I think it has a very minimalistic vibe to it. There's not too much filler, and I love being able to fill that blank while I'm fishing. It has the right feel, the right texture. Hitting the handle at the end with the 400 really gave it a smooth finish, but it has like a little bite to it. The way I would describe this handle feels like velvet. As you guys can see, I'm really minimal with the amount of resin that I put on the rod. If you guys go and look at your stock rods right now, it could be any brand, any label, they have resin going all the way up to the first guide most of the time. And all that is there for is so that they can write all the information about the rod. They get that sheet on there and then they wrap it with the resin. Kind of has no purpose, honestly. I mean, you really don't need that much resin all up the front of the rod. If I do have any resin, it'll be right here. I'll have that WARBAITS logo with the rod information right in the front of the handle. Here I have it mounted up with the Shimano Chronarch G. This is the reel I would use for swim jig fishing. The rod and reel really seem to work well together, and it definitely feels like a great combo as far as the shape of the reel and the way the rod is designed. I'm able to feel that blank and have a very comfortable grip on the reel while fishing. Let's get into the price of this custom rod build. I got the blank at a tackle shop. It had a discount on it and it was $120. That Fuji SK2 reel seat was $10. The cylinder block EVA foam was $10. The Fuji guides plus the Fuji tip altogether was $30. The epoxy was $20. The thread was $3. And the labor on this rod would be $150. Now that's $50 times 3 hours of work. And the grand total for this custom fishing rod is $343. Now $343 is a lot of money for one fishing rod. This is a custom fishing rod made by an actual person with actual hands. That's where the labor factor comes into the price of the rod. Without that $150 labor charge, the rod components themselves were around $200. You can definitely bring that down by buying a pre-made handle so you don't have to shape your own foam. That would bring the price down quite a bit. You can buy cheaper guides, you can buy a cheaper blank. That would all bring the price down for your custom fishing rod. I'm making a custom fishing rod for myself, so I want to use the guides that I prefer, the blank that I want, and the type of reel handle that I prefer holding all day. Now my thoughts on a custom rod versus a stock rod. For $350, you can get a really nice stock rod or multiple fishing rods for that amount of money. You really have to weigh your options when coming to the decision if you want to build or buy a custom fishing rod or not. But I have to tell you, once I built my first one, I just couldn't stop. It just snowballed into the next one, and the one after that. And all the materials I have listed, all those guides you saw, that's just accumulation of projects over the years. You always buy more materials than you need just in case you make an error or a mistake. You have a fix readily on hand. Really, when I'm building a custom rod, I just look at the cost of the blank. How much does the blank cost? Because I know I have an excess of guides and foams and reel handles already in my inventory. Well, I hope this helped you guys in your quest with fishing tackle, building custom rods, buying custom rods, and just fishing in general. Share this video with your friends, give it a like, and give us a subscribe. It really helps us out in the long run, and we appreciate all of your support. I'll see you guys in the next one.